Okay, so an interesting thing about the Zika babies is many of them have been hospitalized since being born for pneumonia and bronchitis. Now, their issue was microcephaly. So why are they being hospitalized with pneumonia? So that made me wonder if Zika, because of it hitching a ride with the chondroitin sulfate, somehow prevented the cartilage in their throat and lungs from forming properly. And that made me think, well, what if there's an overlooked problem in cartilage that contributes to pneumonia and deaths from pneumonia? Influenza kills primarily by the secondary pneumonia that happens afterward. Why? What happens? How can we prevent that? Next. Next. Okay, next one. So, it turns out that the influenza A virus infects cartilage cells called chondrocytes. Next one. And we have those chondrocytes in our trachea, in our bronchi, and these influenza-affected chondrocytes don't seem to actually show any damage until the immune system attacks the chondrocytes. Next one. And they do this, the immune system attacks via these cytokines, which are, it turns out, are part of lung inflammation during infection with the influenza A, especially this cytokine, IL-1 beta has been associated with critical inflammation and people getting very, very ill after infection with influenza A. Next tissue, or next slide. Okay, but chondrocytes can be protected from the cytokine IL-1 beta by another cartilage-derived substance called glucosamine. And they've discovered this while looking at how to protect chondrocytes in the area of arthritis. Next slide. So what I think is happening is the influenza is infecting the chondrocytes, or at least the immature chondrocytes that are closer to where the blood can reach them. And then sitting there and are generally overlooked because it's just sitting there. Unless we get cases like with influenza A where we have that cytokine storm that they've started to talk about to explain the 1918 influenza mortality rate. And I think that increased amount of cytokine causes the chondrocytes to then be exploded or, broken down by the immune system. And if you've got a trachea and bronchi that have underlying cartilage that's damaged, then that's going to help explain, I believe, why bacteria that normally live in the respiratory tract without making us sick are then able to go deeper and allow that secondary pneumonia to develop. Because the bacteria that people get sick from with the bacterial pneumonia after influenza is bacteria that lives in us already. So something is happening, and I think this is what it is. Okay, next slide. And the interesting thing about this is, over in Europe, glucosamine is a very widely used supplement by older people who want to avoid arthritis. And they've found that they are less likely to die of any cause, the people who are taking glucosamine regularly, and they're much less likely to die of respiratory illnesses. So I think I could be onto something here. But this is one of those, I can't prove it. I don't know anyone with influenza, but I do know now that when I get the flu, I take glucosamine because I don't want pneumonia. Next slide. Some substantiating evidence for this, I believe, is I have an older sister who ended up in the hospital nearly dying of acute respiratory distress syndrome, and she's the kind who really loves the China diet and tries to avoid eating any animal products whatsoever. Well, that means no glucosamine to help protect those cartilage cells when she was dealing with a small infection, and then she ended up with pneumonia. In India, when we look at the 1918 flu, the parts that were most likely to be vegetarian, or at least very low meat eaters because of poverty, and a general ability to rely on lentils and other beans, they were the ones who died in much larger amounts. The mortality decreases as you head east toward what's now Bangladesh, where they tend to eat a lot more beef curry. Well, people will say, but 1918 influenza had all those scary hemorrhages going on. Well, there's a researcher who a few years ago said, I think those were from all the aspirin. Aspirin was new, they were prescribing it for dealing with fever, and they didn't realize initially that it could cause hemorrhages in the amount they were giving it. But then some guy tried to rebut her, saying, no, because India and Pakistan didn't have aspirin, and they had all these mortality. They had this high mortality from the flu. Well, if India and Pakistan had the high mortality due to being predominantly vegetarian in practice, if not belief, then maybe she's right, and aspirin explained all the scary lung hemorrhages that they were seeing. And a very interesting thing is that Japanese researchers think that they had about, I think, 1/4 the mortality of other surrounding Asian countries from the 1918 influenza, and they like to eat cartilage. They eat chicken cartilage,